first question I get is, how was John? Second question I get is, you guys are just the antivirus company, right? Hopefully you all know we're not just an AV company anymore. Third question I get is, when are you going to start doing machine learning? That one's like a knife in the heart, right? We've been doing machine learning for over a decade. We have about 700 million endpoint customers that are all feeding telemetry into our machine learning models. The only way to improve machine learning models is to feed it a larger data set. So we have over 1 billion sensors of telemetry that are gathering right now to feed us the telemetry we need to make the most appropriate decisions. So we're a big company. Yes, AV is part of what we do. We acquired a few companies, most recently 2 years ago with the CASB space. We acquired SkyHigh. I was a CTO for Nitro Security before I got acquired by McAfee back in 2006. So my specialty has been security operations for a number of years, but I actually got my start back in the Cabletron days. Maybe you'll remember Cabletron? Yeah. Remember the logo of the switch? It's like 2 arrows kind of crisscrossed like this. It's more than you need to know, but it's my first tattoo. It's sitting right here. Anyway. So the idea today is to understand kind of where we're going as an industry, and more importantly, how SOAR leverages some of the ecosystem approach that we've built. McAfee's been a primary leader in the security industry for about 30 years. We are leaders in 7 of the 9 magic quadrants of Gartner. So if you were to build an entire security platform of just McAfee products, you'd probably do everything you need. But we're not here to say that everything needs to be McAfee. In fact, we're only successful because of our partners. And our partners in the ecosystem allow us to really extend the reach and the functionality that we don't always have a priority in. So for us, we built a technology about 6 years ago called Data Exchange Layer, DXL. It's a message bus architecture, it's a protocol layer, it's the plumbing underneath that allows us to share telemetry and gather information from one product and broadcast it to another. Think of an RSS feed, where I learn something, I publish it on one topic, and somebody else can consume that topic later on. The idea with DXL was to extend the reach of our own platforms and make sure that we could bring in an ecosystem of players. What we like about the SOAR space, is specifically Siemplify, is they've kind of adopted this understanding of ecosystem makes more sense, and that the better way to build fabric-based architectures is to make sure that I'm not building API to API every time. If I build it once to an ecosystem or a fabric like DXL, everything else touching the fabric can also benefit from that. So imagine, the analogy I love to use is a rat, in a maze. You put a piece of cheese in that maze, and that rat's going to make a lot of wrong decisions before he hits the cheese, because there's no penalty for that rat to make a wrong decision, right? The goal of security is to make sure we identify the rat early, we identify his TTPs, his tactics, techniques, and procedures. We learn what he's doing, what the adversary looks like, so we can then broadcast that across the DXL and make sure everyone's inoculated in real time. So that's the goal of DXL, and you can see very quickly kind of how we're going to leverage that going forward. So to us, SOC operators and managers typically have three big concerns. How do I make the outcomes efficient? More importantly, how do I make sure that I'm making the right decision with the right number of resources and the right talent stack? 2, how do I make them all work together? Right? In most cases, if I buy best in breed, it's my responsibility to stitch that fabric together and make sure that vendor A and vendor B are sharing information effectively, and that's not easy unless I hire my own staff of coders. And then lastly, how do I reduce my costs, right? The 2 things I can't create more of for you: I can't create more money, I can't create more time. I also can't create more people, right? The skills gap is a real one, and we'll talk about that in a minute as well. So SecOps is all about trying to really figure out these 3 things. Reducing the time to identify, more importantly, reducing the time to validate, and then the containment, right? This is the dwell time, the amount of time the adversary has to muck around in your environment. The longer we let them stay there, the longer they're going to have a chance to develop a foothold, pivot horizontally, privilege escalations, the things that we want to stop. The goal is to make sure we can contain very, very early, right? So we're not allowing the adversary as much time as he's had in the recent past. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we do this going forward with operations. So the skills gap is real, right? And that is that if every student who's enrolled in college right now and graduates between now and the end of the year 2020, if every one of those students went into cybersecurity, we'd still have a shortfall. There's just not enough gray matter coming out of universities. Now, that being said, my youngest son just graduated top of his class, and I have his resume with me, and I've handed it out about a dozen times already. I don't mind pimping it out. But the problem is real. We've got to solve this problem, and the only way to solve the problem of not having enough people or time is to make more efficient use of the time and people we already have, right? And orchestration automation tools are doing exactly that, and we'll talk about how that happens going forward. So, how many of you maintain a SOC, Security Operations Center? Okay. I think it's pretty clear that the roles and responsibilities of Tier 1 analysts are the mundane. These are the things that everyone has to do on a regular basis. Triage sucks, right? Everyone hates doing it. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of energy. Most of that time is spent gathering data. Most of that time is trying to build user and business context and making sure that the data we're gathering and bringing into an investigation is relevant and put to good use. The idea is to do this signal to noise reduction, make sure that we have as much signal as we can to separate the noise. People talk about trying to find a needle in a haystack. I don't think Leland's analogy is correct. I think we're trying to find the sharpest needle in a big pile of needles. It all looks the same, and the only way to get it done quickly is to automate the hell out of the operation, right? So we're going to talk more about how that happens. The goal of security orchestration is to make sure that we can make better use of our Tier 1 analysts so they can free up their time to start doing Tier 2 and Tier 3 tasks. The only way to keep a Tier 1 analyst happy is to get him out of the mundane task of triage, is to allow him to start elevating his skill set into that of a threat hunter. When I ask questions about customer SOCs, whether or not they have incident responders or threat hunters, they all say, I have IR guys, but we really like them to be hunters. The problem is hunting takes time, and it takes a skill set that a Tier 1 analyst doesn't always have. Right, so we need to free up time with the Tier 1 analysts to make sure they have the time to rebuild their skill sets going forward, because the Tier 2 guys are a whole lot more expensive, and Tier 3, how many people actually have a Tier 3 in their SOC? I don't hear a lot of hands, that's great. Sign of slash threat hunter, right. So it's a sign of maturity that you can elevate to that level. I think everyone's goal is to be in that environment soon. So, there's a huge number of decisions to make. Do I build out a CERT? Do I build out a CSERT? Do I build out a SOC? The thing in common across all these, by the way, is the understanding piece, and that is, how do I build an intelligence model that allows me to make better decisions going forward? And the only way to do that is to learn from my previous history. If I can learn that every time I go through the same process, I start in one place, I end somewhere else. The goal is to make sure that I can solidify that into a playbook and make sure that it's repeatable. It's repeatable for a couple of reasons. One, I can do it accurately every time. Two, I do it much more efficiently. And three, I'm freeing up the resource that was typically taking those 8 or 10 steps to complete, and I'm allowing him to actually to spread his wings a little bit and go in different directions. So that's a key decision to make early on. The next question is, do I build it from disparate platforms? Do I build a bespoke environment where I'm gonna piece this thing together from tools that I'm gonna build in the open source, or do I understand this concept of a plug and play ecosystem? And then lastly, build it myself, outsource it, or build some kind of hybrid model. These are all decisions we're gonna make as we think about the evolution of our SOCs. So we think about the objectives from a SOAR perspective. Anybody that's looked in the SOAR environment knows there's a couple of key things we're trying to do. One, we're trying to make sure that we have a case management and collaboration tool, something that allows all of our Tier 1 analysts to share information so that I can pick up one guy and move him out and put somebody else right in place, and the learning curve is much reduced, right? The idea that I can extend that functionality. Two, I want to make sure that I'm going to triage much quicker and much more effectively, right? When we look at the way playbooks help us to automate and add efficiency to our stack, we're looking at taking remediations that might have taken 4 hours in the past down to 10 or 12 minutes. So what do you do with that freed up time? Well, you can do one of three things. You can either have that same SOC analyst that now has a bunch of time free on his hands go do 10 more incidents if he can. Two, I can have that same person start becoming a threat hunter so he can elevate his skill set. Or three, sometimes this is the unfortunate one, I can de-staff, right? I can scale down my SOC staffing because I now have more resources or fewer resources that are doing more efficiently. So we'll talk about that a little bit too. We think about this in terms of what we call human-machine teaming, and that is understanding what machines do well and understanding what humans do well, because there is a place for both in the SOC. I do a keynote as well that talks about, will we ever be replaced by robots? And the real answer is no. There's tons of things that robots do really well. If you look at just simple things like image processing, and I have a slide that shows a bunch of fried chicken and a bunch of labradoodles. And if you put those pictures all together, a machine can pick out the labradoodle from the fried chicken with about 90% accuracy. So that's pretty good. But the next slide shows the same machine trying to make a robotic decision on a surgery. And is 90% accuracy really effective enough? If I'm going to trust a machine to cut into me, probably not. So there are things machines do really, really well, and there are things that we still have to keep the human in the loop. For instance, never expect a machine to be ethical. Never expect a machine to be strategic or creative. Right? These are still things where we're going to need human capital to make some of these decisions. And that's why you don't automate everything, you automate as much things as you can. I had a couple of customers early on trying to automate the simplest things that were only saving them a fraction of a second, right? They were automating the thing that literally took that much time to complete. So the efficiency model didn't really play out. They didn't get as much value out of it as they thought they could, because they were trying to still keep humans in the loop longer than they should have. And then lastly, don't expect humans to be able to do things like massive volume of data searching, correlation, pattern matching, hypothesis testing. These are areas where clearly machines are going to be much improved, so that interactions with the real world allow these two things to share information and intelligence going forward. So this is a typical model that we like to look at in terms of how we're going to save time in terms of the entire workflow or playbook. If you imagine in a typical use case of, in this case, just a phishing, all of these things that had to happen that included a human interaction. And this is the way most SOCs work. it gets handed off, it gets downstream, and maybe even escalated along the way. But every time there's a step in there that includes a human interaction, that includes time, thinking, and room for error. But imagine if you could automate as much of this as possible and only keep the human in the loop when necessary. We're not saying everything has to be automated, we're saying that the things that need to be done very, very quickly that don't require human interaction, the stuff that a human is going to be needed for, we'll make sure that that's still there. There's still a need for the tier 3 guy, there's still a need for the hunter. There's also still a need for the human capital to make sure that we're making intuitive decisions. When we developed the DXL, originally it was a bit selfish. It was so that McAfee products could talk to McAfee products very well. We very quickly opened that up to the open source and made sure that the entire security community could participate. And in doing so, we actually have about 120 different vendors participating on the DXL right now. About 20% of those vendors aren't even using it to talk to McAfee products. They're using it as the plumbing to talk between vendor A and vendor B because they think it's the right underlying fabric of technology to use. In fact, when we first introduced it, we at the time were selling a next-gen firewall, and surprise, surprise, Cisco and Palo wanted nothing to do with us at the time. So they're like, DXL, no, we're going to do our own thing called PX Grid on the Cisco side. The minute we McAfee divested ourselves of the next-gen firewall, Cisco came back and said, we've always believed in it. We just needed you to get rid of that product line first. Now we're good to go, but we already built PX Grid. So immediately we would build a bridge, what's called an IPE bridge between PX Grid and DXL. So now you can publish on the DXL topic, consume it off PX Grid the same way over on the ICE side inside of Cisco. So we're expanding our ecosystem all the time. But the idea now is that the DXL as well as our Kafka backplane allow all of our technologies to share information as well as all of our partners. So imagine the democratization of your own security data, making sure that no single application holds your data hostage. Imagine being able to consume it once from any countermeasure or telemetry or countermeasure and publish that data back to a single topic. And that topic is now being consumed by many vendors, so no one application has to hold your data hostage. Now imagine if you could orchestrate the communication fabric between all those devices so that if my endpoint sees something, I immediately publish that out to the DXL and it inoculates my web gateway. But now imagine also a use case where I needed a little bit more hands-on activity. We'll show a use case like that in a minute. So imagine this. How many of you are familiar with the concept of an IOC, indicator of compromise? Imagine these 5 steps are the IOC, right? There are 5 discrete activities that are occurring, and each one has its own associated risk score. The problem with thinking about things in terms of an IOC is the C. It's the compromise, right? Our goal is to make sure we stop things before the C, or what I like to call left of the boom, right? The boom is when things happen. When bad things happen is the boom. Say left of the boom on the timeline. So imagine if each of these things is being calculated in real time, or at least over a batch process in short order. The idea is that if I'm calculating a risk score and I've got to the C, I've already missed the job. I've already stopped. I've already let the C happen, right? The compromise. But if you consider each of these things as an artifact, an indicator of attack, an IOA, we have a little more granularity, a little more opportunity to interject ourselves in the middle of this process and then automate a different action, a different response from this. So if I'm going to say that my risk score is 97, that's a bad thing. I've already lost data. The exfiltration happened already in step 5. But if I could say left of the boom, what does it look like? What if I set a policy that says at each time I recalculate risk score, I'm going to have a threshold. If that threshold exceeds a certain amount, I'm going to kick off a playbook that has automated response that says I'm going to go and change things about my environment so I never get to that C. I stay left to the boom, right? So if I say my risk score, my threshold is 50, I now have the opportunity of saying if I get at or above 50, start a playbook that goes and makes changes. So as opposed to letting that user make these behavior, so reaching out to peers and taking folders from a repository she doesn't normally do, and then lastly, exfiltrating data, what if I could stop that beforehand? The minute I see it start to approach 50 or hit 50, I can now say, you know what, I think things are going south. I'm going to start taking dynamic actions, automated, that allow me to say things like change the DLP policy now so that user can no longer copy files to a thumb drive or can no longer log in via RDP or VPN, quarantine the endpoint, disable the AD account, or maybe more importantly, just increase the logging capability to get a little more verbose activity logging so I have more visibility later on in the case I have an investigation, right? So that's the goal. With Siemplify's help, we actually decided we needed something that looked more focused and more bespoke for a McAfee customer. And so we worked with Siemplify to make sure that we had a version of this product and their community edition that they released that is McAfee branded. More specifically, that is fully integrated with all McAfee technologies, as well allows you to take this directly from our marketplace. So now any EPO customer, any customer utilizing the McAfee ePolicy Orchestrator can now see this present in their marketplace and download a copy for free. And that freeness allows them to integrate with all McAfee products as well as a few freebies. Maybe a threat intelligence product, maybe DXL to an email product, or maybe an AD, right? So a few extra things beyond just McAfee. This isn't meant to be at all McAfee, it's McAfee Plus. And then at some point, if you decide I need the full product, you simply come to one of us, either Siemplify or us, and you unlock the full product, right? It's a beautiful arrangement. So the idea is right now, it ships with all the products that you see here. All these integrations are fully fleshed right now. We're adding things every quarter. So you're going to see very soon things like our cloud EPO integration, our new EDR functionality coming in. So all of these are fully shipping right now, and you're going to see more of these McAfee only integrations or McAfee Plus integrations coming very soon. What does it look like? In the dashboard, I think we're actually showing it somewhere out here in the booth as well. You'll be able to see things within the case detail, like what events were triggered, which events were used to start a new investigation. More importantly, what the insights look like, a drill down into the entities themselves. And the entities are important because it's not just a singular activity or an email or a file or an IP address that kicks something off. It's multiple things. So think in terms of SIM, think correlation, right? Rule-based correlation. This plus that generated a new activity. And then lastly, you can actually see the playbook history. What I like mostly about the playbook history is the runtime view. The ability to say, I know exactly what happened all the way up until it hit certain branches. The whole idea of being able to build booleans and if this, then that into the entire platform allows me to scope this thing very well. So if a human is needed, remember I told you before, human-machine teaming means machines do some things, humans do others. If at some point I need a human to validate or vet something, it simply provides me that interface to say, which way do you want to go now? I'll make all the decisions I can on my own, for as many as I can, but the ones that I actually need a human to validate, I'm going to pop that up to the SOC analyst and allow him to make decisions in real time. The other thing I like is that a lot of tools that we looked at in the past had a heavy lift in terms of coding, right? You had to be a Python guy, you had to be able to build your own APIs. More importantly, this is a drag and drop interface that allows some of my customers that may not have the maturity that you do to be able to build this platform with simply dragging and dropping interfaces into the builder itself. Double click on any one of those components that are McAfee and you'll see things like this. Again, 0 Python code that's required. I simply expand it, expose it, plug in values, and hit run, right? It is that easy. And one of the most important things to us is these tools are meant to improve your lifestyle in the SOC. We look at metrics right now where what does an ecosystem do in terms of efficiency? We think it's about 75% improvement in terms of efficiency. But more importantly, somebody actually did the math on how much sleep we lose on a weekly basis. And orchestrated products, we gain back about 30% of our nighttime sleep cycle. I don't know who would actually measure that or how it was done. I trust the math was right. I just think it's an interesting statistic that somebody had a chance to measure. And lastly, you've got to be able to report this, right? You've got to show some type of KPI. How do you know exactly how many cases you're handling? How do you know that the efficiency dropped or improved from a 4-hour cycle per investigation down to a 10-minute? And then what do I do with that extra 3 hours, 15 minutes? So most importantly, how many analysts do I need to staff? How many investigations can each of those handle in a given shift? And be able to provide those metrics. Because ultimately, this has to be reported up. Right? And these are the types of metrics that you're going to want to start showing up to your board. Hopefully your CISOs have a seat at the board. Not all of them do yet. But these are the kind of things we have to start showing. And that is, how are we improving the efficiency and the optimization of our SOC performance? How are we making sure the investments we're making in our security operations staff is being used effectively? And then lastly, are we actually improving our metrics in terms of time to completion? Are we reducing our mean time to response? Are we actually reducing the dwell time the adversaries have? If I look at the open time to the close time, am I actually shrinking the amount of time that the adversaries are playing around in my network? This is always our goal, and the only way to improve those efficiencies is with SOAR. So to answer the questions we talked about from a SOC perspective, right? How do I achieve more repeatable outcomes? Human-machine teaming, right? I let machines do repeatable tasks that I don't have to worry about every single time doing them exactly the same way. 2, how do I make them all work together? In an ecosystem, right? You've got to have a fabric underlying the entire technology to make sure I'm not building one-off API to API integrations, because those are very fragile and they break. DXL gives me that underlying technology that allows me to expand my surface very quickly. How do I reduce costs? By keeping my resources in check, right? Making sure that I don't have to staff a SOC for a 4-hour investigation. I have to staff a SOC for a 10-minute investigation and move on. The only way to get past the time and resource crunch is to get more done with fewer people and less time, right? That's the goal of all of this. With that, I will open up to any questions. Thank you for attending. Hopefully you can check out the product. It'll be shown around this booth.